Alrighty, here's the Zoom lesson from Tuesday. So we are moving into a unit that's going to be on percents and decimals, and you need to be able to do a few things with this unit. The first thing that you need to be able to do is to be able to convert between decimals and percents, and I'm going to add to that and fractions, so that you can take a number and you can convert it, which means to change it. Converting is changing. I can change between decimals, percents, and fractions. So you did not have to draw this 52 hundredths on a 1/100ths block, but you did need to write 52 hundredths as a decimal, which is a decimal point and 52. That means 52 hundredths if I'm looking at a fraction, and then that is equal to 52%. When we are talking about percents, percents mean out of 100, which is going to give us our denominator on our fraction. So 52 out of 100, 52%, and 52 hundredths are three different ways to write the same value. We have 7 hundredths written as a decimal, and that decimal point's a little light, but 7 hundredths. Then we have 7%. And if we were looking at the hundredths blocks, that would be 7 out of 100. And remember that percent, 7%, means 7 out of 100. So this should all kind of be review from last year. And when you're looking at changing a percent to a decimal, you take the percent sign away and you move the decimal 2 places to the left. So if we were changing a percent to a decimal, we would have our 52%. If we were going to change that to a decimal, it's saying that you take the percent sign away, so we would take that off, and we would move the decimal 2 places to the left. And if you don't have a decimal point in the number, then the decimal is here, and we're moving it back 2 places to put it here. And when you do that, you're left with this 52 hundredths. So that is an easy way to divide by 100. When you move the decimal point 2 places to the left, you're really just dividing by 100. So that was the first thing, and that should kind of be review. And then we've got, when you're writing decimals as percents, you want to take the decimal point. So here's my decimal of 38 hundredths. And you're going to move the decimal point 2 places to the right and add a percent sign. So if I have my decimal here and I want to change 38 hundredths to a percent, I move the decimal 2 places to the right. And so now I have 38, and we usually don't write the decimal point there. And then I add a percent sign. And so we've got 38%. Those two things are equal. 38 hundredths, 38%, and as a fraction, that would mean 38 out of 100. And when you move the decimal point 2 places to the right, it's like you're multiplying by 100 when you do that. So in this one, we have 1 4/10. And then if I wanted to change this to a percent, I take that decimal point and I move it 2 places to the right. I have to add a 0 because when I move it here, it's going to need that 0 to hold that place. And then we've got 140%. And that means 140 over 100. So when you have the decimal 1 4/10, that's going to equal 140%, and that's 140 over 100. So that should all kind of be review from last year. What I'm not sure that we got to last year is comparing fractions, decimals, and percents, and then putting them in order. So in order to do that, I think the easiest thing is you need to change them all to either fractions, decimals, or percents. And you can choose whichever one you would like to change them all to. I kind of think it's easier maybe to change them to decimals. So that's what I want to do. So if I have 38% and I'm going to change that to a decimal, remember that if we're changing 38% to a decimal, we get rid of that percent sign, and then we move the decimal back 2 places. So 38% as a decimal would be 38 hundredths. We've got 8 over 25. So when we change that to a decimal, you've got to make the denominator into either tenths, hundredths, or thousandths to change that to a decimal. So I'm going to change it to hundredths. In order to go from 25 to 100, I need to multiply that by 4, which means I have to multiply the top by 4. And that's going to give me 32 hundredths. And that would be 32%. So then I would just change 32% to hundredths by moving that decimal point back 2 places. And then my last one is 41 hundredths. And so we're going to put them in order from least to greatest. So 32 hundredths is the smallest amount, so that 8/25 would be first. And then 38% would be second. And then my 41 hundredths is going to be last. We take the 68%. If I'm changing that to a decimal, I take off the percent sign and I move the decimal back 2 places. So 68% is 68 hundredths. We already have 63 hundredths for our decimal. And then 13 twentieths, I'm going to change to hundredths. To go from 20 to 100, I multiply by 5. Whatever I do to the denominator, remember I have to do to the numerator, and 13 times 5 is 65 hundredths, which means 65%, because remember that means out of 100, so percent means out of 100, and then I would drop that percent sign, move the decimal back 2 places, so that would give me 65 hundredths. So when I'm writing those in order from least to greatest, 63 hundredths is the smallest. My 13 twentieths would come next because that's 65 hundredths. And then 68% would be my largest. Okay, I've got 43 over 50, and if I'm changing that to a decimal, I want to change it to hundredths. So 50 times 2 would give me 100, and 43 times 2 would be 86. So that would be 86 hundredths, and that would be 86%. And if I'm changing that 86% to a decimal, you drop that percent sign and just move the decimal back. 91 hundredths is already there. Now we've got a problem because we have eighths, and I can't do 8 times a whole number to get 10. I can't do 8 times a whole number to get 100. And I can't do 8 times a whole number to get 1,000. So if you end up with a fraction where you can't change it to hundredths or thousands or tenths easily, then you have to divide. So you would do 7 divided by 8. 8 goes into 7 0 times. And I add a decimal and add a 0. 8 goes into 70 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. 70 minus 64 is 6. I'm going to add another 0. I'm going to bring that down. 8 goes into 60 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. I subtract 60 minus 56 is 4. Add a 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times. 5 times 8 is 40. And once I have that 0 remainder, I'm done. So my decimal is 875 thousandths. And then I've got 84%. And to change that to a decimal, remember we take our percent sign off and move the decimal back 2 places. So this one's a little different because I have 2 places after the decimal here. I have 2 places here. I have 3 here, and I have 2 here. It is easiest to compare decimals when you have the same number of digits after the decimal. So if I just add a 0, I don't change that value on the end. My smallest number then would be the 84%. So that's going to be my smallest. The next number, 860, is the next smallest number. So 43 50ths would be my next. 875 thousandths is my next. So 7/8. And then my largest number would be that 91 hundredths. Okay, and then we've got 0.15%. And if we're changing that to a decimal, remember we take that off and then we move the decimal back 2 places. So that would be 15 10,000ths. We have 3/20ths. I'm going to do this down here. 3/20ths, and we're changing that to hundredths by multiplying by 5. 3 times 5 is 15 hundredths, which is 15%. And then I drop that percent sign and move the decimal back 2 places. So I have 0.15, and then I have, and remember that it's easier to compare things if I have the same number of decimals, or same number of numbers after the decimals. So I'm going to add 2 there so that I have 4, and then I'm going to add 1 here. So my smallest number is 15.